welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. On a cold November night in 2021 in the small village of Catskill, New York, nestled along the Hudson River, a life ended in a way that would puzzle investigators and a jury for years to come. This is the story of Scott Myers, a man who witnessed history on September 11, 2001, and Carrie Weiser, a woman whose actions would bring tragedy to a quiet community 2 days before Thanksgiving. This is a story about memory, trauma, and the darkness that can hide behind ordinary conversations. Let's begin. Scott Myers was born in Cincinnati in 1953, one of 5 children. Those who knew him described him as a child prodigy, strikingly intelligent, with an insatiable curiosity about the world. By the time he reached adulthood, Scott had become what his friends called a jack of all trades. He worked as an engineer. He worked for Boeing. He moved fine art for the Guggenheim Museum. He could rewire a house, program computers, and write poetry that moved people to tears. But it was his work as a videographer that would connect him to one of the darkest days in American history. In the late 1990s, Scott lived in Manhattan with his young family. He had built a home for them on the rooftop of a building on John Street, just blocks from the World Trade Center. It was an ingenious construction, complete with a rooftop garden where his children could play above the bustling streets of Lower Manhattan. Scott served as the building superintendent, a job that allowed him to provide for his wife and children in the heart of the city. September 11, 2001, started as an ordinary morning. Scott was home when the first plane struck the North Tower. As a skilled videographer, his instinct was immediate. He grabbed his camera equipment and set it up on a tripod on his rooftop, pointing it toward the burning tower. What Scott captured that morning would become some of the most widely circulated footage of the attacks. His camera recorded the second plane striking the South Tower. It recorded people jumping from the upper floors. Scott's young son tugged on his pants, pointing at the falling figures. "Daddy, Daddy, those are people," the boy said. Scott looked down at his child and lied the way parents sometimes do to protect their children from unbearable truths. "No, that's just debris," he told him. "That's just debris." The National Guard went door to door in the surrounding buildings, ordering everyone to evacuate. They didn't know about Scott's makeshift penthouse on the roof. Scott, his pregnant wife, and their children remained in the building for days as ash and debris covered their home, breaking 2 of their skylights. The footage Scott captured that day would be used by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in their analysis of the tower's structural failure. It would appear in documentaries. It would be seen by millions of people around the world. But for Scott Myers, it wasn't just footage. It was trauma crystallized on tape. The attacks changed Scott Myers in ways that would echo through the rest of his life. His family was eventually evicted from their Manhattan home. They moved upstate to Greene County in the Catskill Mountains, far from the city where Scott had built a life. His marriage began to fracture under the weight of everything they'd experienced. Divorce proceedings followed, and they were messy, complicated by custody battles and financial troubles. Scott accused the judge overseeing his divorce of facilitating terrorism, of aiding bin Laden. The accusation landed him in the Tombs, New York's notorious detention complex, for 6 months on civil contempt charges. It was a dramatic fall for a man who had once worked for prestigious institutions and raised his family in Manhattan. But even in his struggles, Scott remained engaged with his community. After settling in the village of Catskill, he found new purpose. He sang with the local glee club. He attended shows at Bridge Street Theater. He went to services at the Second Baptist Church and the Full Life Church. He danced at bars in nearby Palinville. His friend described him as an iconoclast, someone who questioned authority and wasn't afraid to speak up when he saw injustice. When George Floyd was murdered by police in 2020, Scott joined Black Lives Matter protests. He called for the local police department to be defunded. He was particularly outraged when Greene County Sheriff accepted an award from the Oath Keepers, a right-wing anti-government group. Scott sued Greene County multiple times, representing himself in the proceedings. He opposed the construction of a $39 million jail, arguing that it would perpetuate systemic racism. Scott Myers was complicated. He was compassionate toward those society overlooked, and ruthless toward those in power he viewed as corrupt. He was a man of extraordinary capabilities who had been broken by trauma and was trying to put the pieces back together. By 2021, Scott was 68 years old and living alone in an apartment at 39 West Bridge Street in Catskill. He had outfitted his home with security cameras, a habit perhaps born from his years as a videographer, or maybe from a lingering paranoia after everything he'd experienced. It was in this apartment that he would meet Carrie Weiser again. Carrie Weiser was 32 years old in the autumn of 2021. She lived in Catskill, the same small village as Scott Myers. The two had first met 3 years earlier, in 2018, but they weren't close friends or romantic partners. They were acquaintances, the way people in small towns often are. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, they reconnected at a local soup kitchen. Times were hard for many people, and both Scott and Carrie found themselves relying on community resources. They began talking more frequently. Text messages passed between them, casual conversations about life in a small town during a strange and isolating time. But there was something beneath the surface of Carrie Weiser that wasn't immediately apparent, something that would only become clear much later. In April 2020, more than a year before Scott Myers died, a man arrived at Columbia Memorial Hospital in Hudson, New York, with stab wounds to his neck. He had nearly died. The hospital staff saved his life, but the man refused to cooperate with law enforcement. He wouldn't say who had stabbed him or why. The case went nowhere. Later, this man would tell investigators what happened. He said he had been in a sexual encounter with Carrie Weiser. She told him she wanted to make a small cut on his neck with her knife, that it would heighten their sexual experience. Instead, she stabbed him twice. He survived only because of the quick action of the hospital staff. The man didn't come forward at the time because he was embarrassed, perhaps, or afraid. But when he heard about Scott Myers' death, he found the courage to speak up. He was afraid Carrie would continue what he called her quest of stabbing men. Forensic psychologist Jacqueline Bashkoff would later interview Carrie Weiser extensively. She diagnosed Carrie with paranoid personality disorder. The district attorney would say that Carrie had serious mental health issues, and that she showed no interest in treatment. Thanksgiving was 2 days away. The small village of Catskill was preparing for the holiday. Families were planning meals. Stores were busy with last-minute shoppers. On the evening of November 26th, Scott Myers and Carrie Weiser met at Subversive Brewing, a local restaurant and bar on West Bridge Street, not far from Scott's apartment. They had drinks together. Surveillance footage from the brewery would later show them sitting at the bar, talking, sharing vodka. They left the brewery around 9:15 in the evening and walked down the street to Scott's apartment. What happened next was captured by the security cameras Scott had installed in his home. Hours of footage that would later be played in a courtroom. Footage that would puzzle and disturb everyone who watched it. Scott and Carrie sat in his kitchen, continuing their conversation. They talked about Star Wars. They talked about Scott's children and his inability to see them as much as he wanted. The conversation was meandering, the way conversations between acquaintances often are when alcohol is involved. And then they began talking about September 11th. Scott told Carrie about his experience that day, about filming from his rooftop, about the footage he captured. He mentioned that he had worked on Governor's Island in the 1980s, when it was still a Coast Guard base, just a short distance from where the Twin Towers once stood. He seemed to suggest in that vague way people sometimes do, that this gave him some kind of inside knowledge about the attacks. Carrie's demeanor changed. She told Scott that her father had also worked on Governor's Island. She said they must have known each other. And then she said something strange. "I've been trying to find out about Governor's Island since the 1980s. She pressed him. She demanded to know what he knew about the base, about 9/11, about government secrets. The conversation had taken a dark turn. Around 10 p.m., Carrie got up to use the bathroom. The security camera captured what happened next. While she was gone, Scott dimmed the lights in the kitchen. He took the cocktail shaker Carrie had been using and replaced it with a similar-looking one. When Carrie returned, they continued talking, and then just after 11 p.m., the conversation took an even more unsettling turn. Carrie began talking about stabbing people. She mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer. She referenced Dexter, the television show about a vigilante serial killer who works as a blood spatter analyst. She asked to see Scott's knives. Scott showed her his knife collection. Carrie picked one up, felt its weight in her hand. "I'm not going to stab you," she said. A few minutes later, she added, "You just gave me a knife. I guess you trust me." The security camera had been running throughout their entire conversation. Carrie was aware of it. She had asked Scott about it earlier, calling it creepy. Now she asked him to turn it off. Scott reached over and switched off the camera. The footage ended. Just after midnight on November 27th, a call came into the Greene County 911 dispatch center. The caller was Carrie Weiser. She was frantic, slurring her words, barely coherent. "My boyfriend cut his wrists," she told the dispatcher. Officers from the Catskill Police Department responded to the area of West Bridge Street. Carrie had called from her cell phone but wasn't at the exact address, so officers began checking doors in the vicinity. They found the door to 39 West Bridge Street ajar. Inside, they discovered a scene of horror. There was a large quantity of blood in the kitchen area. On the bed in the apartment lay Scott Myers. He was face down, unresponsive. A knife was near him. There was so much blood. Carrie Weiser was sitting on the floor near the bed, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was covered in blood. She didn't speak when officers first arrived. Scott Myers had been stabbed once, on the left side of his neck. The blade had severed his external carotid artery. The medical examiner would later determine that approximately a liter of Scott's blood had ended up in his stomach. His lungs had fluid buildup, suggesting he had been alive for several minutes after the injury, drowning in his own blood as he lay on that bed. Scott Myers had not cut his wrists. Carrie's 911 call was a lie. State Police investigator Esther Suarez arrived at the Catskill Police Station shortly before 2 a.m. Carrie Weiser had been brought there, still covered in Scott's blood. She had been using her cell phone even after officers asked her to stop. An officer eventually took it from her. Investigator Suarez interviewed Carrie for hours. The interview was recorded on the police station's security camera. Carrie was slurring her speech, crying, her words tumbling over each other in confusion. She told Suarez that Scott had been trying to have sex with her, and she had said no. She brought up self-defense repeatedly. When pressed on what she was defending herself against and how she defended herself, her answers became vague, contradictory. Throughout the interview, Carrie mentioned the security cameras in Scott's apartment. 14 times she told the investigators to check the cameras. "Look at the cameras," she kept saying, insisting she didn't know what they had captured. But the prosecution would later argue that Carrie knew exactly what the cameras had captured, and more importantly, what they hadn't captured. She had asked Scott to turn them off right before the stabbing. The cameras had recorded hours of conversation, including Carrie's disturbing comments about knives and stabbing, her assurance that she wouldn't stab Scott, and her request for the camera to be turned off. But they hadn't recorded the murder itself. There was a problem with the investigation from the start. One of the state police investigators didn't change gloves while examining the crime scene, cross-contaminating pieces of evidence with Scott's blood. This sloppy police work would become a major point of contention during the trial. The security footage from Scott's apartment was password protected. It took months for investigators to crack the code and review the full extent of what the cameras had recorded. Carrie Weiser was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. She was denied bail and held in the Ulster County Jail while awaiting trial. In December 2021, a grand jury indicted her on murder and weapons possession charges. But after Carrie testified to the grand jury that Scott had not been aggressive toward her, though she claimed to have trouble remembering what happened, the indictment was dismissed. She was indicted again in May 2023 on the same charges. Carrie's defense attorneys, Danielle Neroni and Bill Roberts, prepared a complex defense strategy. They argued that Scott Myers had drugged Carrie's drink and was preparing to rape her. They said she had acted in self-defense. They pointed to the moment on camera when Scott replaced Carrie's cocktail shaker while she was in the bathroom as evidence that he had put something in her drink. They also suggested alternative theories, that Carey was so intoxicated she couldn't have formed the intent to murder, that Scott might have stabbed himself, that Carey had been victimized in that apartment even if she couldn't articulate exactly how. After her conviction, the defense tried another approach. They sought a reduced sentence under the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, a 2019 New York law that allows judges to sentence domestic violence victims to shorter prison terms if their crimes were directly related to abuse they suffered. Forensic psychologist Jacqueline Bashkoff testified that Carey had experienced multiple traumas in her life. She reported being inappropriately touched by a group of boys at a synagogue when she was 12. She said a doctor had used surgical tools inappropriately on her genitals following a tonsil surgery. She claimed she had been raped twice in 2018, but didn't report it to police at the time. But there was a problem with this argument. The Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act required that the abuse come from someone in the defendant's household, a family member, spouse, or intimate partner. Scott Myers didn't fit any of these categories. He and Carey were acquaintances, nothing more. Prosecutors investigated Carey's claims thoroughly. They spoke with witnesses, reviewed documents, and listened to her phone calls from jail. In one call to a friend, Carey admitted she had never been abused at home as a child. Judge Charles Taylor ultimately ruled that Carey did not qualify for a reduced sentence under the domestic violence law. The trial of Carey Weiser began in April 2024, more than 2 years after Scott Myers' death. It lasted nearly a month. The jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men from Greene County. They watched hours upon hours of video evidence. The security footage from Scott's apartment showing the evening leading up to the murder, footage from Subversive Brewing showing Scott and Carey having drinks, and more than 4 hours of Carey's police interview. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sandleitner, argued that Carey had shown cunning in her actions and her interview with police. They pointed to her repeated insistence that investigators check the cameras, suggesting she knew the cameras would show her talking about knives, but wouldn't show the actual murder. They highlighted her disturbing references to Jeffrey Dahmer and Dexter. They noted that she had asked investigators who their favorite serial killers were. The defense questioned the testimony of state police investigators, particularly focusing on the contamination of evidence. They argued that Carey had been victimized by Scott Myers, that something had happened to her in that apartment even if she couldn't fully remember or articulate it due to being drugged. The case went to the jury on a Tuesday morning. What followed was 3 days of intense, exhausting deliberation. Twice the jury sent notes to the judge saying they were deadlocked. Twice Judge Taylor sent them back to continue deliberating. One juror who later spoke to reporters said the jury struggled with whether Carey had acted in self-defense. They repeatedly asked to rewatch portions of the security camera footage and Carey's police interview. They debated the quality of the police investigation, frustrated by the evidence contamination. But as the hours wore on, more and more jurors came to believe that Carey had not acted in self-defense, that she was guilty of murder. By the time they sent their second deadlock note, only one juror was still advocating for acquittal. On June 27, 2024, shortly before 4 p.m., the jury reached a verdict. They found Carey Weiser guilty of second-degree murder. When the verdict was read, Carey began to cry. 4 of the jurors started crying as well. Carey looked at one of the crying jurors and shouted out loud, "Why is she crying?" Sentencing was scheduled for August 27th, 2024. But it would be delayed several more months as the defense fought for a reduced sentence under the domestic violence law. During the months between conviction and sentencing, another piece of Carey Weiser's story emerged. The man who had been stabbed in 2020 and nearly died came forward to testify. He told his story publicly for the first time, describing how Carey had said she wanted to make a small cut on his neck during a sexual encounter, only to stab him twice instead. He hadn't come forward earlier because he was embarrassed and afraid. But after Scott Myers' death, he felt he had no choice. He was terrified that Carey would continue what the prosecutor called her quest of stabbing men. On November 6, 2025, nearly 4 years after Scott Myers' death, Carey Weiser stood before Judge Charles Taylor for sentencing. The hearing lasted almost 2 hours. At one point, the judge left the courtroom to think about what sentence he would impose. Assistant District Attorney Monica Kenny-Keth read impact statements from Scott's siblings, Jenny and Chris Myers, who attended the sentencing virtually. "I'm heartbroken that Scott's life was so carelessly snuffed out," Jenny's statement said. "He had a community that cared about him, and his life was brutally cut short, and his potential was wasted. I lost my big brother," Chris's statement said. "I know Scott had much more to give, and he should have had that chance." Judge Taylor addressed the court, speaking about the nature of the crime and Carey's actions. He noted that when Carey asked Scott to turn off the cameras, it showed premeditation. "The nature of the crime speaks for itself," he said. "It was brutal." He expressed concern about Carey's current status and posture toward her own actions, questioning whether she was capable of rehabilitation. "Maybe she will be a different person after 15 years, he said. The judge asked Carey if she wanted to make a statement. She declined. Judge Taylor sentenced Carey Weiser to 20 years to life in prison. It was 5 years less than the maximum sentence of 25 to life, but it meant Carey would spend at least 2 decades behind bars before even being considered for parole. When the sentence was announced, Carey showed no reaction. The case of Carey Weiser and Scott Myers raises more questions than it answers. What really happened in those minutes after the camera was turned off? What was Carey's true motive? Was it related to their conversation about 9/11 and Governor's Island? Some paranoid conspiracy theory that took root in a mind already troubled? Was it something darker? A compulsion that had already nearly killed one man and would eventually kill another? We know what the jury decided based on the evidence presented. We know what the prosecution argued and what the defense claimed. But there's a gap in the story, those minutes when the camera was off, that'll never be fully filled. Scott Myers survived the September 11th attacks. He captured footage that day that helped investigators understand what happened, that documented one of the most significant moments in modern American history. He lived with the trauma of that day for 20 years, raising his children, fighting for causes he believed in, trying to build a life in a small town along the Hudson River. But he didn't survive November 26, 2021. He bled to death in his apartment, killed by someone he had known for years. Someone he had sat with at a bar just hours earlier, someone he had trusted enough to turn his back on, to turn off his security cameras for. His sister Jenny said Scott was interesting enough, complex enough, to be worth a book or a film. She was right. Scott Myers lived an extraordinary life, touched by history in ways most people never are, marked by trauma and resilience in equal measure. Carey Weiser will spend the next 20 years in a New York State prison. Whether she will ever fully take responsibility for what she did, whether she will seek the mental health treatment that multiple experts say she needs, remains to be seen. The district attorney said she showed no remorse at any stage of the proceedings. The small village of Catskill, New York, continues on. People walk past 39 West Bridge Street. The community remembers Scott Myers through his activism, his art, his presence at local events. They remember him as someone who cared deeply about justice, who wasn't afraid to speak up, who had survived unimaginable trauma and kept fighting for what he believed was right. And on quiet November nights, when the Hudson River flows past the village and the Catskill Mountains rise in the distance, perhaps some people think about that evening in 2021, about 2 acquaintances having drinks at a brewery, about conversations that turned dark, about security cameras that captured everything except the moment that mattered most. This was the story of Scott Myers and Carey Weiser. A story of trauma, paranoia, violence, and loss. A story that reminds us how little we sometimes know about the people we think we know, and how quickly an ordinary evening can become a tragedy. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. In the winter of 2021, just days before Christmas, a vibrant life was cut short in Massachusetts. This is the story of Sherelle Pringle, a a 40-year-old mother whose ambition and warmth touched everyone around her. It's also the story of how her family refused to give up, and how their determination led them to uncover a terrible truth. Cheryl Michelle Pringle was born on January 19th, 1981 in Boston, Massachusetts. From her earliest days, she carried herself with a natural confidence that would define her entire life. Her family described her as a born leader, someone who never let obstacles slow her down. Growing up in Boston's West Roxbury neighborhood, Cheryl attended Chittick Elementary School, then Solomon Lewinberg Middle School, before graduating from West Roxbury High School. But education didn't stop there for her. Cheryl had dreams, and she was determined to chase every single one of them. She enrolled at Roxbury Community College, where she earned her associate's degree in business. But even that wasn't enough. Cheryl went on to the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where she focused on fashion design, earning her bachelor's degree. For someone who loved shopping and photography, fashion felt like a natural calling. She had an eye for beauty, for putting things together in ways that made people notice. For more than 10 years, Cheryl worked at the Steward Medical Group in Watertown, Massachusetts. Her colleagues knew her as hardworking and reliable, someone who brought positive energy to every shift. Outside of work, she was an event promoter, and she took particular pride in organizing an annual black tie dance that brought the community together. But more than any achievement or credential, Cheryl was defined by her role as a mother. Her son, Jamani Lurian, was everything to her. Friends say she was always pushing him to reach higher, to be better, to chase his own dreams the way she had chased hers. They had what family members called an unbreakable bond. Jamani was 19 years old in December of 2021, on the cusp of adulthood, still relying on his mother's guidance and support. Cheryl's mother, Pearl Garner, watched her daughter build this life with pride. Pearl had raised a strong woman, someone who kept her foot on the gas and never let up. Cheryl loved traveling, taking photographs wherever she went, spending time with family, and doting on their dog. She enjoyed life fully, openly, with a beautiful smile that friends say she wore constantly. By December of 2021, Cheryl's life was on an upward trajectory. She had just put an offer on a home, and it had been approved. She was planning for the future, thinking about the next chapter, about stability and growth. Everything seemed to be falling into place, and then she went on a date. Saturday, December 18th, 2021, began like many other days for Cheryl. She spent time with her mother, Pearl, talking and enjoying each other's company. Later that day, Cheryl told her mother she had plans to go out that evening. She was going on a date with Bruce Mybin, a man she'd been seeing for several months. Bruce was 44 years old and lived in Lynn, Massachusetts, about 15 miles from Cheryl's home in Woburn. The nature of their relationship wasn't entirely clear to everyone in Cheryl's life. Some referred to him as her boyfriend, while others had concerns about how things were going between them. But that Saturday night, Cheryl got ready and left her Woburn home to meet Bruce. She was in good spirits, looking forward to the evening ahead. According to family members, she and Bruce were last seen together at a Boston nightclub around 1:30 in the morning on Sunday, December 19th. And then Cheryl disappeared. Sunday came and went without any word from her. Cheryl didn't return home. She didn't answer her phone. She didn't respond to text messages. For a woman who was in constant contact with her son and her mother, this silence was deafening. This wasn't like her at all. By Sunday afternoon, Jamini knew something was wrong. He tried reaching his mother repeatedly. Nothing. He called family members, asking if anyone had heard from her. No one had. The worry began to build, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency. Jamani reported his mother missing to police on Sunday. He told them about the date with Bruce Mybin. He told them she should have been home by now. He told them he was afraid. According to Jamani, Bruce had told the family that he dropped Cheryl off at home early Sunday morning. But Jamani knew that wasn't true. He'd been home. His mother never came through that door. From the very beginning, Jamani pointed investigators toward Bruce Mybin. He told them to locate Bruce, to ping his phone, to track him down. He knew, in that way that family members sometimes just know, that Bruce held the key to his mother's disappearance. But hours were passing. A full day went by, and and still there was no sign of Sherelle Pringle. By Monday, December 20th, Sherelle's family couldn't wait any longer. They organized their own search, determined to find her themselves. They made and distributed flyers with her photographs, spreading them throughout Woburn and the surrounding communities. Sherelle's face smiled out from those flyers. Her beautiful, warm smile that everyone knew. More than 200 family members and friends joined the effort. They searched parking lots, alleyways, parks, anywhere they could think of. The community rallied around Pearl Garner and Jamani, showing up in numbers that spoke to how much Sherelle was loved. But the official investigation was moving more slowly than the family had hoped. They felt that not enough was being done in those critical first 48 hours. The frustration was building, the fear growing sharper with each passing hour. Then someone had an idea. They could use technology to find Sherelle's phone. Through location tracking, they discovered that Sherelle's phone was in Lynn, dropped into a catch basin on the side of the road. Essentially a storm drain. It was a chilling discovery. Why would her phone be discarded like that? Using the phone's last known location, family members began working backward, retracing a path that they hoped would lead them to Sherelle. They drove slowly along Route 107, the Salem Turnpike, looking for any sign, any clue. And then someone spotted something. A purse lying on the side of the road near the Rumney Marsh Reservation in Saugus. It was Sherelle's purse. Family members pulled over, their hearts pounding. They began searching the marshy area. Alongside the highway, it was Tuesday afternoon, December 21st. The marsh was cold and desolate, the kind of place no one wants to be in winter, much less while searching for someone they love. And then several feet into the brush, they found her. Sherelle Pringle's body was lying in the marsh, discarded like refuse, left to the elements just a few days before Christmas. Her family found her before the police did. They were the ones who had to see her there, who had to call 911, who had to stand by helplessly as investigators began processing the scene. A worker from a neighboring business later described hearing the family's cries, hearing them beg for someone to call for help. Jamani stood at the scene with dozens of other family members and friends. Over 30 of Sherelle's loved ones gathered there on that roadside, some of them sobbing, others standing in shocked silence. Police and emergency vehicles lined the right travel lane of Route 107 northbound as investigators worked. Pearl Garner, Sherelle's mother, was there too. Family members rubbed her back and embraced her as she cried. A piece of her had died with her daughter, she would later say. The Essex County District Attorney's Office confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. Foul play was suspected. An autopsy would later reveal the horrifying extent of the violence that had been inflicted on Sherelle. She had been stabbed 217 times. 217. The brutality was beyond comprehension. The wounds were so extensive that the family would have to hold a closed casket funeral. No one would see Sherelle's beautiful smile again. The day after Sherelle's body was found, on Wednesday, December 22nd, 2021, Massachusetts State Police arrested Bruce Mybin. He was taken into custody by the State Police Violent Fugitive Apprehension Section. Initially, he wasn't charged with murder. Instead, police charged him with larceny over $1,200, tampering with evidence, and obstruction of justice. These charges related to the investigation into Sherelle's death, but prosecutors needed more time to build their case. Bruce appeared in Lynn District Court on Thursday, December 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas. The courtroom scene was emotional and chaotic. Nearly 350 spectators logged into the Zoom hearing, while family members packed the physical courtroom. Judge William Martin had to abruptly end the hearing when onlookers began yelling at Mybin, calling him a murderer. The judge entered a plea of not guilty on Bruce's behalf. There were chants from the crowd. Murderer. Some of them shouted, "Justice for Sherelle Pringle." LaDawn Jackson, Sherelle's friend, spoke to reporters after the hearing. "To lose her in this way is unbelievable," she said. "But for people to show up the way they did is a blessing." Diana O'Brien, who had known Sherelle since she was 12 years old, struggled to make sense of what had happened. Everybody knew her, and everybody loved her, she said. That's why you see all of these people out here today. The whole community is heartbroken by this. Jamani spoke too, his voice heavy with grief and frustration. "What hurts the most is, I told these cops from the jump to locate Bruce Mybin," he said. "I told them day one. You need to locate Bruce Maibin. He lives in Lynn. You need to ping his phone and find him. He had one more message, one he hoped other young men would hear. As a son, if you have a mom and she has a boyfriend, please check up on your moms, he said. I should have done that. I should have checked and said, are you good? Are you sure? The weight of what-ifs would be something Jomani would carry for a long time. A vigil was held for Sherelle a week after her body was found, in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood. Around 200 family members and friends gathered, releasing purple and white balloons into the December sky. People spoke about the woman they'd lost, about her ambition, her laughter, her generosity. Glenn Wilder, Sherelle's cousin, remembered her smile. She always had a beautiful smile, he said. Always happy. Everything was always good with Sherelle. On Tuesday, January 4th, 2022, Bruce Maibin appeared in court, again for a dangerousness hearing. This time, prosecutors updated the charges against him. He was now officially charged with murder in the death of Sherelle Pringle. A not guilty plea was entered on his behalf. He was ordered held without bail. As the investigation continued, prosecutors began piecing together what had happened in the hours and days leading up to Sherelle's death. They looked at text messages, phone records, and witness statements. What they found painted a disturbing picture. According to a pretrial motion filed by prosecutors, Sherelle had sent text messages to a friend shortly before she died. In those messages, she said she was done with Bruce. She was planning to end their relationship. Why? Because according to those same text messages, Bruce had recently broken into her home and threatened her with a knife following an argument. Sherelle was scared, and she decided she couldn't be with someone who would do that. But did Bruce know she was planning to break up with him? That would become a key question as the case moved forward. Bruce's defense attorneys would later argue that prosecutors hadn't proven Bruce knew Sherelle wanted to end things. They suggested that even if he had known, there was no evidence he would have reacted with violence. The defense's position was that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on speculation. But prosecutors had evidence. They had Sherelle's phone discarded in a storm drain. They had evidence that Bruce had tampered with and attempted to hide. They had the fact that Bruce had not immediately cooperated with police, had not come forward to help find Sherelle, and they had the brutal reality of 217 stab wounds. The case was moved from Lynn District Court to Essex County Superior Court after a grand jury indictment. It would be almost 4 years before the case went to trial. 4 years of waiting for Sherelle's family. 4 years of Jomani growing into a young man without his mother's guidance. 4 years of Pearl Garner sitting on her porch at night crying for the daughter she'd lost. In November of 2025, Bruce Maibin's case finally went to trial in Essex County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed with Sherelle's family and friends, who showed up day after day to watch the proceedings. They wanted Bruce to see them, to know that Sherelle hadn't been forgotten, that her life had mattered. Prosecutor Kate McDougall represented the Commonwealth, along with Assistant District Attorney Lindsay Nasson. They laid out the evidence methodically, building a case that showed Bruce Maibin had murdered Sherelle Pringle in a fit of rage after she decided to leave him. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt, suggesting that prosecutors hadn't definitively proven Bruce knew about Sherelle's plans to break up with him. But the evidence was overwhelming. On Monday afternoon, November 3rd, 2025, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty. Bruce Maibin was convicted of first-degree murder. 2 days later, on Wednesday, November 5th, Judge Thomas Drexler sentenced Bruce Maibin to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would be sent to the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, one of Massachusetts' maximum security prisons. He would die there. At the sentencing hearing, Pearl Garner stood before the court to deliver a victim impact statement. She looked directly at the man who had killed her daughter. "You don't deserve to be walking here," Pearl said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You will get what you deserve because God don't like ugly." She described the viciousness of the crime, the fact that her daughter had been stabbed more than 200 times. Mutilated so badly they couldn't even have an open casket. When Sherelle was murdered, a piece of me died with her, Pearl said through tears. "I sit on my porch at night alone and just cry. I think about her all the time and want to know why. Why you did something like this, so vicious." She had one more thing to say to Bruce Maibin. "You're scum," she told him. I hope you rot in hell for what you did. Essex County District Attorney Paul Tucker addressed the media after the sentencing. This verdict and subsequent sentence will ensure that the defendant will be held accountable for his senseless and atrocious conduct, he said. Our hope is that the family and friends of Sherelle Pringle can find some comfort in this outcome. In her obituary, Sherelle's family wrote words that captured the essence of who she was. They described her as ambitious, as a natural-born leader. They wrote that she always kept her foot on the gas and never let up. She was a true leader, but most importantly, they wrote about her role as a mother. She was an amazing mother, the obituary read, always pushing her son to do more and to do better. Always made sure she was the foundational support for Jomini. They had and will always have an unbreakable bond. Sherelle left behind her son, Jomani Lurian, who had to navigate his late teens and early 20s without his mother's guidance. She left behind her mother, Pearl Garner, who would never stop grieving for the daughter who was taken too soon. She left behind her big brother and guardian, Dealyosius Wesley, and her step-siblings, Danielle and Dana Carthy. She left behind what her family called a boatload of relatives, all of whom had been touched by her warmth, her ambition, her constant encouragement. And she left behind a community in Woburn and Boston that had loved her, that had gathered by the hundreds to search for her, to mourn her, to demand justice for her. The home that Sherelle had put an offer on, the one that had been approved just before she died, represented all the dreams she still had. She was 40 years old, with so much life still ahead of her. She was planning for the future, thinking about the next chapter. But Bruce Meiben took all of that away in a brutal act of violence. 217 stab wounds. The number itself speaks to the rage, the absolute lack of control, the desire not just to kill but to destroy. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a momentary lapse. This was sustained, deliberate violence. Cases like Sherelle's remind us of the dangers that can lurk in intimate relationships. Sherelle had sent text messages saying she was done with Bruce after he broke into her home and threatened her with a knife. Those were warning signs, red flags that something was very wrong. But leaving a dangerous relationship is often the most dangerous time for victims of domestic violence. Statistics show that the period when someone decides to leave is when they're at highest risk of being killed by their partner. Sherelle was planning to end things, and that decision cost her life. For her family, the guilty verdict and life sentence brought a measure of justice. But no amount of courtroom proceedings can bring Sherelle back. Pearl Garner will still sit on her porch and cry. Jomani will still grow older without his mother's guidance and love. Bruce Meiben will spend the rest of his life in prison, but Sherelle's family will spend the rest of theirs with an empty chair at every holiday gathering, every birthday, every milestone. The case also highlights the importance of family persistence. When police didn't act quickly enough, Sherelle's family took matters into their own hands. They used technology to track her phone. They searched on their own. They found her body when law enforcement hadn't. Their determination ensured that Sherelle's case didn't go cold, that Bruce Meiben was held accountable for what he'd done. As we close this story, we remember Sherelle Pringle not as a victim, but as the ambitious, warm, driven woman she was. We remember her smile, which friends say never faded. We remember her love for her son, which was unshakable. We remember her dreams, her education, her career, her love of fashion and photography and travel. We remember a life that was full of promise, cut short by senseless violence. Rest in peace, Sherelle. Michelle Pringle, January 19th, 1981 to December 19th, 2021. A natural-born leader, an amazing mother, forever loved, forever missed. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. All calls are confidential and toll-free. If you're still awake and listening, check whether you've left your little goodnight comment. I always check your comments before I sleep too. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Meanwhile, let's move on to our third story. Story 3. Tonight we're going to explore a case that shook France to its core in the autumn of 2022. This is the story of Lola Daviette, a 12-year-old girl whose life was taken in the most unimaginable way. In the 19th arrondissement of Paris, there lived a girl named Lola Daviette, born on August 18, 2010, in the northern French town of Béthune. Lola had spent most of her life in the bustling streets of northeastern Paris. She was a student at Collège Georges Brassens and had earned recognition as a champion in air bobs. Her parents, Johann and Delphine Daviette, worked as caretakers in their apartment building. It was honest work, the kind that keeps a building running smoothly, though it often goes unnoticed. The Daviettes lived in the same building they maintained, creating a close-knit existence where work and home blended together. Lola was described by teachers and friends as diligent and friendly. She had dreams of becoming a doctor, inspired perhaps by an innate desire to help others. Those who knew her spoke of her infectious enthusiasm, particularly when it came to gymnastics. She would practice for hours, perfecting her routines, her body defying gravity in graceful arcs and twists. Her commitment had paid off when she was selected to represent her region in the French Gymnastics Championships. For a 12-year-old from a working-class family, this was no small achievement. It represented years of dedication, early morning practices, and the unwavering support of parents who believed in their daughter's potential. She had a brother, and together they navigated the ordinary joys and challenges of sibling life. The Daviette family wasn't wealthy, but they were together. They were building something. A life. A future. October 14th, 2022, started like any other Friday for Lola Daviette. That Friday afternoon was unremarkable in its ordinariness. At 3:20 in the afternoon, Lola was captured on CCTV, entering her apartment building. School had let out, and she was heading home, just as she did every day. The footage shows something else, though. Lola was seen following a woman into the building. This woman would later be identified as Davia Benkiard, a 24-year-old from Algeria. Benkiard wasn't a stranger to the building. Her 26-year-old sister lived in the same apartment complex as the Daviette family, in a flat that she was subletting. This connection meant that Benkiard was occasionally around, though she had no permanent residence there herself. There had been a recent interaction between Benkiard and Lola's mother, Delphine. As the building's caretaker, Delphine had the responsibility of controlling access to the apartments. Benkiard had requested a pass to enter the building on her own, but Delphine had refused. It was a small moment, the kind of mundane decision a building manager makes dozens of times without thinking twice. But in hindsight, this refusal would take on a darker significance. According to later testimony, when Lola came home from school that day, Benkiard had approached her and asked if she could help with her suitcases. Lola reportedly said she had been instructed not to go into strangers' homes, but Benkiard had insisted, eventually luring her into her sister's apartment. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Johann Daviette reported his daughter missing to police, after she failed to return home from school. For any parent, those first hours of a missing child are filled with a particular kind of terror. The mind races through possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. As the caretaker, Johann had access to the building's CCTV system. He reviewed the footage himself, likely hoping to see his daughter safely entering the building, perhaps visiting a friend's apartment. What he saw instead would begin to unravel a nightmare. The cameras captured the return of the woman Lola had followed into the building. Less than 2 hours after entering with Lola, the perpetrator was recorded leaving the building, carrying heavy luggage. That same evening, Lola Daviette was found dead in a travel trunk in the 19th arrondissement of Paris. The discovery was made just hours after her father had reported her missing. Her body was found in a plastic box in a communal area, outside the building she lived in. It was the kind of storage container you might use for holiday decorations or winter clothes. Ordinary, unremarkable, but inside was something that would haunt everyone who learned of it. The autopsy revealed that Lola had died of cardiorespiratory failure with signs of asphyxiation and cervical compression. But that clinical language barely captures the horror of what had been done to this child. Over 90 minutes, Benkiard had subjected Lola to a sexual assault before attacking her with scissors and a box cutter. Lola was bound with duct tape, including around her head, causing death by asphyxiation. She had multiple other injuries, notably to her face and back, and large cuts to her neck, which according to the coroner did not play a role in her death. These were injuries inflicted after death, or perhaps as she was dying. The bottoms of her feet were branded with the figures 0 and 1, despite extensive investigation and testimony during the trial. No one could determine what these numbers meant. Were they random, symbolic, part of some private delusion? The answer died with whatever thoughts drove Dabia Ben-Kierd that afternoon. Investigation showed that Ben-Kierd had conducted searches online into witchcraft days before the murder, though this detail would remain one of many unexplained elements of the case. Building residents had seen Ben-Kierd in the lobby of the apartment block on October 14th, carrying suitcases and a heavy trunk covered in a blanket. Combined with the CCTV footage that Johan Daviet had reviewed, investigators quickly identified their suspects. On October 17, 2022, 3 days after Lola's murder, 24-year-old Dabia Ben-Kierd was indicted on charges of murder of a minor under 15 and rape with torture and acts of barbarism. Who was Dabia Ben-Kierd? Her background would become a crucial and controversial element of the case. Born in Algiers, Algeria, Ben-Kierd had come to France legally in May 2016 on a student visa, which she then overstayed. She had settled in France in 2013 but had no stable job or residence. By 2022, she was essentially homeless, moving between acquaintances. She had no prior criminal record and was known to police only as a victim of domestic violence in 2018. This detail paints a picture of someone who had experienced trauma herself, though of course victimhood never justifies becoming a perpetrator. Her sister testified to investigators that Ben-Kierd had been making incoherent statements at night. Something was clearly wrong, though precisely what remained unclear. 2 months before Lola's murder, on August 21, 2022, Ben-Kierd was detained at Orly Airport for having neither a plane ticket nor valid identity papers, and was issued an obligation to leave French territory the same day. As she had no criminal record, she was not sent to a detention center, but given 30 days to return to Algeria. She never left. And 2 months later, Lola Daviet was dead. The investigator who questioned Ben-Kierd recalled his astonishment at her composure after her arrest. He described her as frequently lying, very arrogant and aggressive. During her interrogation, Ben-Kierd fluctuated between accepting and denying responsibility. She said that her account of committing the crime was actually a recall of a dream. At points, she blamed the crime on an armed stranger, or a ghost. When shown pictures of Lola's body, Ben-Kierd said, "That leaves me indifferent. I was raped too, and I saw my parents die in front of me." Whether these claims about her own trauma were true or fabricated, no one could say for certain. During testimony, Ben-Kierd described growing up in a dysfunctional family, a childhood spent between Algeria and France, unloving aunts, and a violent father. She mentioned sexual abuse she allegedly suffered at the hands of a neighbor when she was 14. She claimed she had turned to prostitution, encouraged by her drug dealer boyfriend, and smoked cannabis, saying 20 joints a day, "It made me feel good." However, investigators said no evidence was found to support the claim that Ben-Kierd had been engaged in sex work. Ben-Kierd stated that her motive was her dispute with Lola's mother over the building access pass, a refused request for a key card. Such a small thing, such a devastating result. Ben-Kierd was not known to psychiatric services, and was declared mentally fit to be interviewed by police. This finding would become central to the case. 3 psychiatric experts said they had noted psychopathic tendencies in the defendant, and did not think she suffered from any mental health condition that could be cured. Although experts who evaluated Ben-Kierd's mental health noted her manipulative behavior, they said she did not suffer from any major psychiatric disorder. Psychiatric evidence introduced at her trial stated that she was of normal intelligence and was not suffering from any psychological trouble, displaying no psychiatric pathology. This presented a puzzle. Here was someone capable of extraordinary cruelty, someone whose sister said made incoherent statements at night, someone whose behavior in interrogation was erratic, yet psychiatrists could find no diagnosable mental illness, no treatable condition, no explanation that would fit into the categories that medicine recognizes. The prosecutor would later sum this up simply: when there is no illness, there is no treatment. The case became immediately politicized in France, though the Daviet family repeatedly asked that their daughter's death not be exploited for political purposes. After it was revealed that Ben-Kierd had ignored an order to leave French territory, Right-wing political figures criticized the government. In the National Assembly, Marine Le Pen criticized Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne, who responded by saying that the crime should be left to the police and judiciary. President Emmanuel Macron met with Lola's parents and condemned the murder as an act of extreme evil. The Minister of the Interior was present at Lola's funeral. The parents' attorney said they called on politicians to not exploit her photograph for political ends. In their grief, the Daviots wanted justice for their daughter, not to become symbols in a larger cultural debate, but symbols they became nonetheless. Immigration opponents pointed to the case as evidence of enforcement failures. Others argued that conflating one horrific crime with broader policy issues was unfair and inflammatory. The debates raged on television and in Parliament while the Daviot family tried to grieve. The toll on the Daviot family was incalculable. Lola's father, Johan, died in 2024, following his daughter's death. He was 49 years old and had fallen into alcohol abuse in the wake of his daughter's murder. Johan had been the one to report his daughter missing. He had been the one to review the CCTV footage, watching his daughter walk into danger. He had fought for justice for his child. But in the end, the loss was too much to bear. His death meant that when the trial finally came, 3 years after Lola's murder, he would not be there to see its conclusion. The family that had once been whole was now fractured beyond repair. In October 2025, 3 years after Lola's death, Davia Benkird stood trial in Paris. On the first day of trial, the girl's family sat in court, wearing white t-shirts with a picture of a smiling child and the words, "You were the son of our life." When the defendant entered the dock, one woman in her 50s broke down in tears. "I apologize to the whole family, Ben," Geard said in a monotone. "It's horrible what I did. I regret it." But her emotions during the trial told a different story. When images of the child's mutilated body were shown during the hearing, Lola's mother left the courtroom while Benkirad remained impassive. The prosecutor painted a picture of someone beyond rehabilitation. "Make no mistake," they told the court. "No drug treatment can fundamentally transform Miss Benkirad's personality. When there is no illness, there is no treatment." One of the victim's brothers, Thibaut Daviet, urged the accused to tell all the truth and nothing but the truth. Whether she ever did remains questionable. The trial lasted a week. Paris watched. France watched. And on October 24th, 2025, the verdict came. After a week-long trial, Davia Benkird was sentenced to life in prison without parole for raping and murdering Lola Daviet. This sentence is known in France as réclusion criminelle à perpétuité, incompressible or perpétuité réelle, irreducible, indefinite criminal imprisonment or real-life imprisonment. Benkird became the first woman in France to receive this sentence since it was introduced into French law in 1994. Only 4 other criminals have been thus sentenced, all of them men. French law allows a review after 30 years. Upon request by the convicted person, a special panel of 5 judges from the Court of Cassation, the country's highest court, may authorize release, but only if it poses no serious threat to public order, and after consulting victims' families. In practical terms, Benkirad will almost certainly spend the rest of her life in prison. When handing down the sentence, the chief judge stressed the extreme cruelty of the criminal deeds and real torture, further saying that the court had taken into account the indescribable psychological harm done to both the victim and her family. Lola's mother and brother embraced and broke down in tears. As the verdict was read, throughout the trial, Davia Benkirad remained largely emotionless and showed no reaction during the reading of the verdict. In a statement after the sentencing, Lola Daviet's brother thanked the French justice system, saying that his family was happy with the response we received. The victim's mother added, "Even if it won't give us back our Lola, Cladtil de le Petit." The Daviet family lawyer welcomed a fair decision based on reason, humanity, truth, and memory, saying, "We restored this young girl's memory. We restored a shattered truth." Even with the verdict delivered and the sentence handed down, questions linger over this case like a fog that won't lift. Why did Davia Benkirad do this? The dispute with Lola's mother over building access seems woefully inadequate as an explanation for such brutality. Was there mental illness that the psychiatric experts couldn't detect or categorize? Was she simply, as they concluded, a person with psychopathic tendencies but no treatable disorder? What did the numbers on Lola's feet mean? The 0 and the 1 marked on the soles of a dying child. Were they significant to Benkerd? Random? No one knows. Why did she search for information about witchcraft in the days before the murder? Was this connected to her actions, or merely a coincidence? And perhaps the most painful question for many in France: could this have been prevented? If the deportation order had been enforced, if Benkeder had been required to leave the country in August as ordered, would Lola Daviet still be alive? The Daviet family has been clear that they don't want their daughter's death used as political ammunition, but the question of systemic failures is legitimate, even if it provides no comfort to a grieving family. At the trial, members of Lola's family wore matching t-shirts, bearing a drawing of the young girl and the words, "You will be the sun of our lives and the star of our nights." This is how they choose to remember her. Not as a victim, though she was one. Not as a symbol, though she became one. But as their sun and their star. Lola Daviet was 12 years old when she died. She was a champion gymnast with dreams of becoming a doctor. She was a daughter, a sister, a student, a friend. She had her whole life ahead of her, a lifetime of achievements and failures, loves and losses, ordinary moments and extraordinary ones. All of that was taken from her on an October afternoon in Paris by someone she tried to help with their luggage. The case is closed now. Dabia Benkeder will spend the rest of her life in prison. Justice, such as it is, has been served, but justice cannot restore what was lost. It cannot bring back a father who drank himself to death from grief. It cannot give a mother and brother back the girl who was the sun of their lives. In northeastern Paris, in the 19th arrondissement, there is an apartment building where the Daviet family once lived and worked, where Lola once came home from school, full of energy and life and dreams. That building stands as it always has, ordinary and unremarkable. But for those who know the story, it will never be just a building again. This is the story of Lola Daviet, a girl who deserved so much more than 12 years, a family that deserved so much more than this grief, and a question that will haunt everyone who hears this story. How do we protect the innocent from evil we cannot predict or understand? There is no satisfying answer to that question. There never is. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight we're going to explore a case that shook a quiet Canadian suburb. A story that began with promise and ended in tragedy. This is the story of Bitch Pan, a woman who traveled across oceans seeking a better life, only to have that life cut short in the most unimaginable way. In 1979, the world was watching as history unfolded in Vietnam. The fall of Saigon had changed everything, and among the millions affected were a young couple, Bech Hapan and Hue Hanpan. They were ethnically Chinese, living in Vietnam, and like so many others, they saw their future slipping away. So they made a decision. They would leave. They would go to Canada, a country they'd heard promised opportunity, safety, and most importantly, a chance for their children to succeed in ways they never could. Ho Chin Han arrived in Canada with little more than hope. They settled in Markham, Ontario, a suburb northeast of Toronto. It was quiet there, tree-lined streets, modest homes, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, the kind of place where you could build something, and build they did. Both Bitch and Han found work at Magna International, an auto parts manufacturer. Bitch worked her way up to supervisor. Han was a machinist. The work was steady, honest. They saved every dollar they could. Over the years, they managed to save $200,000. They bought a house on Helen Avenue in Unionville, a neighborhood where families barbecued in their backyards and children rode bikes down the sidewalks. They had 2 children. First came Jennifer, born in 1986. A few years later, they had a son, Felix. For Betch and Han, their children represented everything. They were the reason for the journey, the reason for the sacrifice, and they were determined that Jennifer and Felix would have every advantage, every opportunity to excel. From the very beginning, expectations were high in the Pan household. Jennifer was enrolled in piano lessons at age 4. Her parents wanted her to be exceptional, not just adequate. A few years later, they added figure skating to her schedule. She trained competitively, early morning sessions at the rink before school, weekends consumed by practice. Her parents monitored everything. Report cards were scrutinized. Any grade below an A was met with disappointment. Social activities were limited. No parties, no school dances. Dating was forbidden until after high school. The rules were clear and non-negotiable. This style of parenting, often called tiger parenting, is rooted in a belief that discipline and high expectations lead to success. For Bitch and Han, who had grown up with far less, it made perfect sense. They wanted Jennifer to become a doctor. They wanted Felix to design cars. They had specific visions for their children's futures. But for Jennifer, the pressure became something else entirely. It became a weight she couldn't carry. In 8th grade, something shifted. Jennifer earned her first B. It seemed small, insignificant. But to her, it felt catastrophic. She couldn't show that report card to her parents. She couldn't face their disappointment, so she didn't. Instead, she altered the grade. She changed the B to an A and showed them the doctored report card. They praised her. They were proud. And Jennifer discovered something. Lying was easier than failing. That first lie opened a door. And once opened, Jennifer found it impossible to close. As Jennifer moved through high school, the lies multiplied. She struggled in her classes, particularly in calculus. Her grades weren't good enough for the universities. Her parents envisioned, but Jennifer couldn't tell them that. So she kept up the charade, showing them forged report cards. Always straight A's, always perfect. Then came high school graduation, or rather the lack of it. Jennifer failed calculus in her senior year. She didn't graduate, but her parents had no idea. Jennifer purchased textbooks and pretended to attend classes at Ryerson University, where she'd supposedly been accepted on scholarship. Every day she would leave the house with her backpack, drive to the local library, and spend hours there, reading, passing time, maintaining the illusion. Her parents believed she was studying to become a pharmacist, just as they'd always hoped. But Jennifer had also begun a secret relationship. In 2003, she met Daniel Wong. He was different from the academic achievers her parents would have approved of. Daniel sold marijuana. He had a reputation. But Jennifer felt something with him she'd never felt before. Freedom. They dated on and off for years, always in secret. Jennifer would tell her parents she was at the library or with friends. Instead, she was with Daniel, living a life her parents knew nothing about. The lies grew more elaborate. Jennifer claimed she'd graduated from Ryerson and transferred to the University of Toronto to study pharmacology. She forged acceptance letters, scholarship notifications, even a university diploma. She created an entire fabricated life, complete with a volunteer position at a children's hospital and a part-time job as a piano teacher. To keep up appearances, Jennifer would leave the house dressed professionally, as if heading to her pharmacy program. Sometimes she'd go to Daniel's apartment. Sometimes she'd just drive around, killing time until it was reasonable to return home. Her parents were proud. Their daughter, the pharmacist in training, was everything they'd hoped for. But the truth was crumbling beneath her feet. In 2009, everything began to fall apart. Jennifer's parents started asking questions. Where was her employee ID? Why didn't she have a hospital uniform? Could they visit her workplace? Jennifer scrambled for answers, but the questions kept coming. Eventually suspicious, her parents did some digging. They called the university. They checked records. And then they knew. Their daughter wasn't a university student. She wasn't studying to be a pharmacist. She didn't have a degree. She hadn't even graduated high school. Nearly a decade of lies. Exposed in a single afternoon. For Bitch and Han, the discovery was devastating. This wasn't just about education. It was about trust. About the foundation of their family. How could their daughter have deceived them for so long? But there was more. They also discovered Jennifer's relationship with Daniel Wong, the drug dealer, the boyfriend she'd been seeing in secret for years. The reaction was swift and absolute. Bitch and Han gave Jennifer an ultimatum. she could stay with the family, under their rules, working to get her life back on track. Or she could leave with Daniel and forfeit her place in the family forever. Jennifer chose to stay, but the terms were strict. Her parents confiscated her cell phone and laptop. They monitored the odometer on her car. They checked her emails and messages. Jennifer was allowed to work as a piano teacher, but that was it. No freedom, no privacy, and absolutely no contact with Daniel Wong. For Jennifer, it felt like prison. She had spent years constructing a secret life, and now it had been stripped away. Her relationship with her parents, already strained, became toxic. She felt controlled, suffocated. The pressure that had once driven her to lie now drove her to something far darker. In the spring of 2010, Jennifer made a decision that would change everything. She contacted an old high school friend, Andrew Montemare. Through him, she met Ricardo Duncan. According to Jennifer, she paid Duncan $1,500 to kill her father at his workplace. She wanted it to look like a random attack. Duncan took the money but never went through with it. Later, he would claim he returned the cash and refused the job. But Jennifer wasn't finished. She reconnected with Daniel Wong. According to police, the two of them devised a new plan. They would hire professional hitmen to stage a home invasion. Her parents would be killed. Jennifer would inherit approximately $500,000 from their life insurance and estate. She and Daniel could finally be together, free from her parents' control. Daniel connected Jennifer with Lenford Crawford, a Jamaican-born man with connections to people who could carry out the job. The price was $10,000. Daniel gave Jennifer a separate phone and SIM card so she could communicate with Crawford without using her regular cell phone. Crawford brought in Eric Carty, who in turn contacted David Melvaganem. The plan was set. On Halloween night, 2010, Crawford visited the Pan neighborhood, scoping out the house, learning the layout. Text messages flew between Jennifer, Daniel, and Crawford over the following days, coordinating details. The date was set, November 8th, 2010. Monday, November 8th, was an ordinary evening for Bitch Pan. She had dinner with Jennifer at home. Then, as she did every Monday, Bitch went out line dancing with friends. It was something she loved. A few hours of music and movement, time with friends away from the demands of work and family. She returned home around 9:30 that evening. The house was quiet. Han was upstairs. Jennifer was in her room. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. At 9:35, Jennifer received a phone call from David Melvaganem. Shortly after, she went downstairs and unlocked the front door. Then she returned to her room. At 10:05, Melvaganem and two other armed men entered through that unlocked door. Betch was in the living room. One of the men pointed a gun at her. Another went upstairs to the master bedroom, where Han was getting ready for bed. The intruder put a gun to Han's head and forced him downstairs. The men demanded money. Han told them he had $60 in his wallet. They took it, then they ransacked the master bedroom, searching for more cash. What happened next would later become crucial to the investigation. According to Han's testimony, he saw Jennifer walking freely around the house with the intruders. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't afraid. She spoke to one of the men in a soft, almost friendly manner, whispering something Han couldn't quite hear. The intruders took Betch and Han down to the basement. Then they opened fire. The gunshots echoed through the quiet house. Bitch was hit multiple times. One bullet struck her in the head. She died almost instantly. Han was shot in the face and shoulder. The bullet to his face destroyed his left eye and part of his cheekbone. He collapsed, bleeding, barely conscious. The intruders took $2,000 from Jennifer, maintaining the illusion of a robbery. Then they fled. Upstairs, Jennifer called 911. Some people broke into our house, Jennifer told the dispatcher. Her voice was panicked, breathless. They were holding my parents at gunpoint. She said her hands were tied behind her back and bound to the banister at the top of the stairs. Somehow, she explained, she'd managed to reach the phone in her pocket and dial for help. When police arrived minutes later, they found exactly what Jennifer described. She was tied to the banister, her hands secured behind her. Downstairs, in the basement, they found a scene of horror. Betch Pan lay dead. Han Pan was critically injured, barely clinging to life. The neighborhood was shocked. Unionville was quiet, safe. Home invasions didn't happen there. Murders didn't happen there. The York Regional Police immediately launched an investigation. Initially, they considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. But as they examined the scene, questions began to emerge. Why hadn't the intruders taken any of the valuables? The house was filled with expensive items, jewelry, electronics, even the keys to 2 luxury cars. A Mercedes and a Lexus were readily accessible, yet nothing had been stolen, except a small amount of cash. Why had Jennifer been left completely unharmed? Not tied up initially, not assaulted, not taken to the basement with her parents. And how had she managed to call 911 with her hands supposedly bound behind her back? The investigators asked Jennifer to demonstrate. She did, somewhat awkwardly, managing to reach a phone in her pocket while her hands were tied. It was possible, but it seemed unlikely. And there was something else. Something about her demeanor that didn't quite fit. She seemed calm. Too calm. The police interviewed Jennifer the evening after the murder. She told them about the intruders, 3 men in masks. She described how they demanded money, how they'd shot her parents. She cried. She seemed devastated, but Detective Bill Cordes and his team were already skeptical. They canvassed the neighborhood, checking security cameras. One neighbor's system had captured footage of 3 men entering the penthouse through the front door at around 10:05. Half an hour later, one man was seen leaving quickly. The other 2 ran out shortly after. The police also discovered something interesting about Jennifer's personal life. Her ex-boyfriend Daniel Wong was known to them. He had a record. He sold drugs. When they spoke to Daniel, he mentioned something unusual. He'd been receiving crank calls recently, hang-ups, and strange messages. Jennifer, he said, had been getting them too, but Jennifer hadn't mentioned that in her initial interview. Why not? The investigators brought Jennifer in for a second interview. This time the questions were more pointed. Jennifer admitted something she'd kept hidden. For years she'd been lying to her parents. About school, about her degree, about her career. She'd fabricated an entire life. The investigators listened, but they were thinking about something else entirely. If Jennifer could lie to her parents for a decade, what else might she be capable of? On November 12th, 4 days after the attack, Hanpan woke from his medically induced coma. He was blind now, permanently. The bullet had destroyed his eye and damaged his optic nerve. But his mind was clear, and he had a story to tell. Han told the detectives what he'd seen that night. He described watching Jennifer walk around the house with the intruders. He described the way she'd whispered to one of them, soft and familiar. She hadn't been bound. She hadn't been afraid. She knew them, Han said. Use your police techniques to find out what Jennifer did. His own daughter. The daughter he'd worked so hard to provide for. The daughter he'd sacrificed everything for. He was certain she was involved. On November 22nd, Detective William Goetz brought Jennifer in for a third interview. Detective Bill Gates was a specialist. His expertise was in truth verification, analyzing behavior, detecting deception. He'd studied interrogation techniques extensively, including the Reed technique, a method designed to extract confessions. For the first 2 hours, Goetz was friendly, conversational. He and Jennifer talked about her childhood, her piano lessons, her figure skating. They even joked about Swan Lake, Goetz calling it Swans on the Lake, pretending ignorance. Jennifer laughed, correcting him. She seemed relaxed. But Goetz was watching everything. Her body language, her tone, the way she answered certain questions. He was building a profile, identifying weak points in her story. Then at the 2-hour mark, everything changed. Goetz leaned forward. Jennifer, he said, I need to be honest with you. I'm not a regular homicide detective. I'm a truth verification expert, and I know you're not telling me the truth. He told her the police had computer software that could analyze statements for deception. He told her they had satellite technology with infrared cameras. They could track movements inside buildings. None of this was true. But in Canada, police are legally allowed to lie during interrogations. Jennifer's composure began to crack. Gordetz pressed harder. They had her phone records. They had text messages. They knew about Daniel. They knew about Croft. And then Jennifer broke. But what she said wasn't what Goetz expected. Jennifer admitted she'd hired the hitmen, but she claimed the plan wasn't to kill her parents. It was to kill her. According to Jennifer, she'd been so overwhelmed, so trapped, that she'd arranged her own murder. She'd paid the men $2,000 to kill her and make it look like part of a home invasion. But something went wrong, she said. They killed her mother and shot her father instead. Goetz didn't believe her. Jennifer Pan was arrested that day. November 22nd, 2010, she was charged with first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. Within months, the other conspirators were arrested as well. Daniel Wong, Lenford Crawford, David Mulviganum, Eric Carty, the getaway driver. The case was moving toward trial. The trial began in March 2014 in Newmarket, Ontario. It would last 10 months. All 5 defendants, Jennifer Pan, Daniel Wong, Lenford Crawford, David Mulviganum, and Eric Carty, pleaded not guilty. The Crown's case was methodical and overwhelming. They presented exhaustive tracking of cell phone records. Over 100 text messages had been exchanged between Jennifer and Daniel in the 6 hours before the murder. The messages discussed timing, logistics, final details. They showed how Crawford had visited the neighborhood on Halloween to scout the location. They demonstrated how Jennifer had been given a separate phone and SIM card to communicate without detection. The evidence about the attack itself was particularly damning. And Pan testified about seeing Jennifer walk freely with the intruders, about hearing her whisper to them, the fact that Jennifer hadn't been harmed, that valuable items hadn't been stolen, that she'd been left upstairs while her parents were taken to the basement. All of it pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't a random home invasion. It was orchestrated murder. The defense tried to argue that Jennifer was a victim of her circumstances, a young woman crushed by impossible expectations. They highlighted the pressure she'd faced, the decade of lies born from fear and desperation. But the jury wasn't swayed. On December 11th, 2014, after days of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. Guilty. Jennifer Pan was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Daniel Wong, Lenford Crawford, and David Mulviganum received the same verdict. Eric Carty, whose case had been severed due to his lawyer's illness, later pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. In January 2015, Jennifer was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. She was 28 years old. She cried when the verdict was read. "They didn't even give me a chance," she said. Her father, Han Pan, wasn't present in the courtroom. He'd chosen not to attend. But he made a statement through his victim impact testimony. He'd lost his wife, he'd lost his sight, and he'd lost his daughter, not to death, but to something perhaps worse, betrayal beyond comprehension. Jennifer was taken away in handcuffs. The trial was over, but the story wasn't finished. In the years since the trial, Jennifer Pan has maintained her innocence. She's currently incarcerated at the Grand Valley Institution for Women in Kitchener, Ontario. According to her sentence, she won't be eligible for parole until 2039, when she'll be 53 years old, roughly the same age her mother was when she died. In May 2023, there was a significant development. The Ontario Court of Appeal ordered a new trial for Jennifer and her co-conspirators on the first-degree murder charge. The court ruled that the original trial judge had made an error by instructing the jury to consider only first-degree murder, rather than also allowing them to consider second-degree murder or manslaughter as possible verdicts. The attempted murder conviction still stands. As of now, the case is still working its way through the legal system, with the Supreme Court of Canada deciding whether to hear the appeal. The true crime documentary What Jennifer Did, released on Netflix in 2024, brought renewed attention to the case. It sparked widespread discussion about parenting, pressure, mental health, and the immigrant experience. Some people saw Jennifer as a monster, a cold-blooded killer who murdered her own mother for money and freedom. Others saw her as a victim, a young woman destroyed by impossible expectations and a lack of support for her mental health struggles. The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between. Jennifer Pan began cutting herself in 8th grade, a clear sign of severe distress. She developed elaborate coping mechanisms based on deception, constructing an entire false life to avoid disappointing her parents. These are symptoms of someone struggling profoundly with anxiety, depression, and identity. But recognizing those struggles doesn't erase what happened. Beach Pan died. Han Pan was blinded and traumatized. A family was destroyed. Jennifer's younger brother, Felix, who'd been away at university the night of the attack, lost his mother, his father's sight, and his sister all in one terrible night. He's never spoken publicly about the case. The hitmen themselves remain somewhat mysterious. David Mulvaginum, Lenford Crawford, and Eric Carty were all convicted or pleaded guilty. But the identity of the person who actually pulled the trigger, the one who fired the bullet that killed Bitch Pan, has never been definitively established. Eric Carty, the getaway driver, died in prison in 2018. The Jennifer Pan case forces us to confront difficult questions. How do we balance high expectations with compassion? How do we recognize when pressure becomes destructive? How do we support young people who are struggling before they reach a breaking point? The term tiger parenting became central to discussions about the case. Some people argued that Buchanan Hanan's strict approach drove Jennifer to desperation. Others countered that millions of children grow up under similar pressure without resorting to violence. Sociologist Jennifer Lee, speaking about the case, cautioned against oversimplifying. It would be a mistake to attribute Pam's troubles to tiger parenting alone, she said. The expectations didn't come only from her parents. They came from teachers, peers, institutions, society itself. Asian American and Asian Canadian communities found themselves having difficult conversations about the model minority myth, about mental health stigma, about the unique pressures faced by children of immigrants who feel caught between two worlds. Karen Ho, a journalist who went to high school with Jennifer and wrote extensively about the case, noted, "The more I learned about Jennifer's strict upbringing, the more I could relate to her. Because so many people have gone through the experience of growing up like Jennifer, it's not unfathomable to them that someone would just break, but breaking doesn't have to mean murder." The case serves as a reminder of the importance of mental health support, of open communication within families, of creating environments where children feel they can be honest about their struggles without fear of catastrophic consequences. It's also a reminder that deception, once begun, can spiral. Jennifer's first lie, that altered B in 8th grade, seemed harmless, but it set a pattern. Each lie required another to support it. The facade grew more elaborate, more fragile, and when it finally collapsed, Jennifer felt she had nothing left to lose. In the conversations about Jennifer Pan, about pressure and expectations and mental health, it's sometimes easy to forget the most important person in this story. Bitch Ha Pan. She was 53 years old. When she died, she'd spent her entire adult life working, sacrificing, building a better future for her children. She'd fled her homeland, learned a new language, adapted to a new culture. She'd worked her way up from factory worker to supervisor. She'd saved money, bought a home, provided for her family. She loved line dancing. Every Monday she'd go out with friends, enjoying those few hours of freedom and joy. She never knew what her daughter had planned. On November 8th, 2010, Bitch came home from dancing. She walked into her house, probably thinking about the evening, maybe planning the next day. She had no idea that within an hour she'd be dead. She begged for Jennifer's safety. In those final moments when the armed men were threatening her in Han, Bitch's last words were about protecting her daughter. "Please don't hurt my daughter," she said. She didn't know her daughter was the one who'd brought those men into their home. Bitch Pan deserved better. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to see her grandchildren. If there were to be any, she deserved to retire, to travel, to enjoy the fruits of decades of hard work. Instead, she was shot to death in her own basement by men her daughter had hired. That's what makes this case so haunting. Not just the violence, but the betrayal. The inversion of the most fundamental bond, parent and child. The story of Jennifer Pan and the murder of Bitch Pan is many things. It's a true crime case with dramatic interrogations and courtroom battles. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of excessive pressure and the importance of mental health support. It's a tragedy about an immigrant family's dream that turned into a nightmare. But perhaps most of all, it's a reminder that our choices have consequences. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. Jennifer made a choice, not in a moment of passion or sudden rage, but deliberately over months of planning. She chose to solve her problems with violence. She chose to hire hitmen. She chose to unlock the door. And because of that choice, her mother is dead. Her father is blind. Her brother has no family. The hitmen are in prison. An entire community was shaken. One choice. All those consequences. As you drift off tonight, think about Bitch Pan. Think about a woman who crossed an ocean, seeking a better life. Think about the sacrifices she made, the dreams she had. And remember that behind every true crime story, there's a real person whose life was cut short. Someone who mattered. Someone who was loved. Bitch Pan. Remembered. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Tonight, we're going to tell you a story. It's a difficult one, but it needs to be told. This is the story of a boy named Michael Raimondi, a community that came together in the face of unimaginable tragedy, and a family forever changed on an October night in 2024. This happened in Somers, New York, a quiet town in northern Westchester County where neighbors know each other's names and children walk to school down tree-lined streets. It's the kind of place where people feel safe, where tragedy seems like something that happens elsewhere. But as we know, darkness can find its way anywhere. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael Raimondi was 15 years old. He had big cheeks that rounded when he smiled, and a twinkle in his eye that his teachers would later say melted their hearts. He was a sophomore at Somers High School, just 2 weeks away from turning 16. Just 2 weeks away from getting his learner's permit, something he'd been eagerly anticipating. Michael loved cars. Not in the casual way some teenagers do, but with a genuine passion that lit him up. He would spend hours talking about them, studying them, dreaming about the day he could work on them. His teachers knew that when he became a junior, he'd be able to attend automotive classes at BOCES, the vocational education program. They'd seen his excitement when he talked about it. His eyes would light up at the thought of finally getting his hands on real engines, real transmissions, learning the craft he loved. But Michael's interests were broader than just cars. He loved origami, the ancient art of paper folding that requires patience and precision. He built elaborate structures with Legos, losing himself in the creative process. His teachers said he had a fertile imagination, a rich interior life full of vibrant and unique ideas. He could take apart almost anything and put it back together again, his mind working through the puzzle of how things fit together. Those who knew him described him as mischievous, but in a gentle way. He would playfully tease his teachers, sometimes try to get out of doing his schoolwork with that infectious grin of his. His silliness made people laugh. He had a way of lighting up a room, even on the darkest days. He was such a sweet and innocent young boy. His cousin Angela would later say, and everyone who knew him remembers him as the person who always brought us joy. Michael lived with his mother, Christina, and his younger brother, Matthew, who was 13. The boys were close despite their age difference. Matthew looked up to his older brother, and Michael taught him lessons about perseverance and never giving up. Both boys had recently joined the Westchester County Police Department's cadet program. They were excited about it, eager to learn about law enforcement, to be part of something meaningful. Christina Raimondi was 38 years old, a devoted mother who always put her family above all else. She was the kind of mother who showed up, who made sure her boys had what they needed, who loved them fiercely. The family lived in the Crossroads housing complex on Route 6 in the Baldwin Place section of Somers. It wasn't a mansion, but it was home. It was where the boys did their homework, played video games, built their Lego creations, folded their origami. For a time, Christina had been in a relationship with a man named Fernando Jimenez Meza. He was 40 years old, originally from Chile. He lived in nearby Yorktown Heights, but spent time at the Raimondi home. The neighbors would occasionally see him working outside, though they didn't think he lived there full-time. What they didn't know, what perhaps Christina herself didn't fully understand, was the danger that was slowly taking shape in her home. The date was October 28th, 2024, a Monday night. For most families, it would have been an ordinary evening. Dinner, homework, maybe some television before bed. The kind of unremarkable Monday that blends into all the others that you forget by Wednesday. But for the Raimondi family, this Monday would be anything but ordinary. Something happened that evening. The details of the argument are known only to those who were there. But at some point, a verbal dispute erupted in the Raimondi home. Voices were raised. Tensions escalated, and at approximately 11:35 p.m., Fernando Jimenez Meza made a decision that would destroy lives. He left the townhouse, stepped outside into the October night, walked to his car, and from that car he retrieved a revolver.
Think about that moment. The walk from the house to the car, the opening of the car door, the feeling of the gun's weight in his hand. At any point during those seconds, he could have stopped. He could have driven away. He could have chosen differently, but he didn't.
Fernando Jimenez Meza walked back into the Raimani home, carrying that revolver, and he started shooting. He shot Cristina first. The mother, the woman he had been in a relationship with, fell wounded in her own home. Then he went to the boys' bedroom. Michael and Matthew were there, two brothers, two children who should have been safe in their own home. He raised the gun and fired several times. Michael Raimondi, 15 years old, 2 weeks from his 16th birthday, died from his injuries. His brother Matthew, just 13, was critically wounded. Their mother Cristina lay injured, fighting for her life, and then Fernando Jimenez Meza fled into the night. At 11:35 p.m., emergency calls started coming in. First responders rushed to the Crossroads housing complex. What they found was a scene of devastation. Blood. 3 victims. A family torn apart in moments of senseless violence. Michael's grandparents, Armando and Miriam Cordova, received the call that no grandparent should ever receive. They sped to the complex, hearts pounding, minds racing with fear. When they arrived, they found police cars, ambulances, chaos. And somewhere in that chaos, they encountered Fernando Jimenez Meza. He was still at the scene, still armed. He pointed the gun at the grandparents before fleeing into the darkness. Imagine the terror of that moment. The grief and the fear colliding. Their grandson dead or dying. Their daughter and other grandson critically wounded. And the man responsible threatening them with the same weapon. Michael was pronounced dead. Cristina and Matthew were rushed to hospitals. Cristina went to Westchester Medical Center. Matthew to New York Presbyterian Hudson Valley Hospital. Both were in critical condition, clinging to life. And Fernando Jimenez Meza was in the wind. The New York State Police launched a massive manhunt. They tracked him into neighboring Putnam County to an area near Peekskill Hollow Road in Putnam Valley, about 15 minutes from the crime scene. As dawn broke on Tuesday, October 29, schools across the area went into lockdown. The Putnam Valley Central School District closed entirely. Parents were told to keep their children home. Residents were ordered to shelter in place. Nobody knew where the armed suspect was hiding. Law enforcement flooded the area. State police, Westchester County Police, Putnam County Sheriff's deputies. They searched through the morning, checking trail cameras, reviewing security footage, following every lead. And then around 11 a.m., roughly 12 hours after the shooting, they found him. A retired NYPD detective named Patricia Schiller had come to check on her office building in Putnam Valley. She noticed something wrong. The air conditioner had been knocked out. The blinds were drawn in a way they normally weren't. She heard something on the interior camera. Heavy breathing. She alerted the troopers. I think the guy's inside there. Police brought in K-9 units. They searched the building. They found Fernando Jimenez Meza hiding in a bathroom in the back. When they released the police dog, it bit his arm and leg. The manhunt was over. Fernando Jimenez Meza was taken into custody. He was charged with second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and criminal possession of a weapon. He was remanded to Westchester County Jail without bail. The news spread through Summers like a shockwave. A teenager murdered, his mother and brother fighting for their lives. The suspect caught. People couldn't believe it. This was Summers, where children played in Rias Park, where Friday night football games brought the community together. This wasn't supposed to happen here, but it had happened, and now the community had to respond. Michael's teachers at Summers High School were devastated. Doreen Stucker and Ann McGuire, who had taught him, remembered his big smile, his playfulness, the way he could make them laugh even when they should have been disciplining him. Mike Lacco talked about Michael's love of origami and Legos, his ability to take things apart and put them back together. They all spoke of a boy with depth, with creativity, with so much potential that would never be realized. On Saturday, November 2, just days after the shooting, the town of Summers organized a vigil. It was held at Race Park in Katona at 6 p.m. Hundreds of people showed up, family members, friends, teachers, neighbors. People who had never met Michael but were moved by his story and wanted to show support. They held candles in the gathering darkness. They shared memories. Angela, Michael's cousin, spoke of his sweet smile, how he always brought joy, how he lit up rooms even on dark days. Another young cousin shared a lesson Michael had taught him. Never give up, keep pushing yourself until you can look back and say, I did it. Teacher spoke through tears. Michael had a rich interior life, full of imagination and vibrant and unique ideas. One said, there was so much depth and creativity within him. We were only beginning to uncover them. The family's pain was unimaginable. Lenny Ye, a cousin, told reporters, for all of this, it's just unreal. You don't think it's real. But he also expressed profound gratitude for the community's support. You have lifted our spirits and showed us we are not alone, he said. The love and generosity you have given will stay with us forever. A GoFundMe campaign was established to help with medical bills, funeral expenses, and therapy. The response was overwhelming. People donated not just from Summers but from across the country. Complete strangers who heard the story and wanted to help. The campaign raised over $190,000. More than 2,600 donations poured in, each one a small gesture of compassion, a recognition that this family would need support for a long road ahead. Both Michael and Matthew had been members of the Westchester County Police Cadet Program. The department released a statement. Our Westchester County Police Cadet Michael Raimondi was killed in a tragic domestic violence incident yesterday in Summers, NY, that also left his mother, Christina, and brother Matthew, also one of our cadets, in critical condition fighting for their lives. We join with the Raimondi family and friends in grieving Michael's death, and we stand with the Summers school community in support of Matthew and Christina during this tragic time. Summers Town Supervisor Robert Scarano spoke at the vigil about how proud he was of the community's response, how residents had stood together in the face of unimaginable tragedy. He praised the first responders who had saved Christina's and Matthew's lives. This town is proud of our first responders for saving the lives of 2 people, he said. And we are greatly grateful for their dedication. But saving their lives was only the beginning. The road to recovery would be long and painful, both physically and emotionally. As Michael's family buried him, as they mourned the loss of a boy who would never turn 16, never get his driver's license, never work on cars at BOCs, never grow into the man he was meant to become. Other details about the case began to emerge. Immigration and Customs Enforcement revealed that Fernando Jimenez Meza was in the United States illegally. He was a citizen of Chile who had entered the country at an unknown date, but this wasn't his first encounter with U.S. authorities. On August 11, 2004, more than 20 years before he murdered Michael Raimondi, Jimenez had been stopped by Border Patrol at or near Tecate, California. During that encounter, he claimed to be a Mexican citizen named Eric Melendez Arauno. He was voluntarily returned to Mexico, but at some point after that, he re-entered the United States unlawfully. For years, his whereabouts were unknown to law enforcement. Then, in 2018, he was arrested in Yonkers for driving while intoxicated. He received a $500 fine and was released. Media reports indicated he was also charged with assault in 2018, though details of that case are unclear. And then, for 6 more years, he lived in the Hudson Valley. He lived in Yorktown Heights. He became involved with Christina Raimondi. He spent time in her home around her children. He was there when Michael was learning to fold origami, when Matthew was growing up, when the boys joined the police cadet program. And on October 28, 2024, he shattered their lives. On December 5, 2024, Fernando Jimenez Meza stood before a judge for his arraignment. It was his 41st birthday. Family members of the Raimondis filled the courtroom. They wore t-shirts bearing Michael's image, commemorating a boy who should have been celebrating his 16th birthday that month, not lying in a grave. Michael's grandmother, Miriam Cordova, spoke to reporters. He was a sweet little person, full of kindness, she said, her voice heavy with grief. He loved animals and helping people. She talked about how Michael should have been getting his learner's permit, should have been planning his Sweet 16 party. Instead, they were visiting his grave. Armando Cordova, Michael's grandfather, hugged the prosecutors after meeting with them. I just want to ask the community to keep praying for my family, he said. Fernando Jimenez Meza pleaded not guilty at that initial arraignment. His lawyer declined to comment. He faced charges of second-degree murder, attempted murder, first-degree assault, second-degree criminal possession of a weapon, and menacing. The maximum penalty for the murder charge alone was 25 years to life in prison. But Christina and Matthew's fight wasn't over. Both remained hospitalized, both facing long recoveries. Christina had to process not only her own trauma and injuries, but the unbearable reality that her oldest son was gone. Matthew at 13 had to recover from gunshot wounds while grieving his brother and worrying about his mother. In July 2025, 9 months after the shooting, Christina posted an update on the GoFundMe page. She had purchased her first home in Putnam County. She had hoped to stay in Westchester so Matthew could remain in the Somers School District, but it wasn't financially possible. Matthew was still enrolled in Blevedale Children's Hospital's Day Hospital program, a treatment program scheduled to continue through the fall of 2020. This is my first home purchase, something I never imagined doing alone. Christina wrote, I wish more than anything that Michael was here with us to share this moment. He deserves to be here. I miss him every single day. She continued, this next chapter is scary and uncertain, but I'm also hopeful it will bring healing. I truly couldn't have come this far without all of your support, emotionally, practically, and financially. In March 2025, Christina joined state legislators and local officials for the introduction of a new bill designed to ensure safe housing transfers for domestic violence victims. She was turning her trauma into advocacy, trying to help others avoid the fate her family had suffered. On October 23, 2025, nearly a year after Michael's murder, Fernando Jimenez Meza appeared in court again. This time, he was there to plead guilty. He pleaded guilty to every count in the indictment: second-degree murder, 2 counts of second-degree attempted murder, 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of second-degree criminal possession of a weapon, and 2 counts of second-degree menacing. Judge George Fafidio accepted the guilty pleas. He promised Jimenez Meza a sentence of 25 years to life in state prison on the murder charge, and 12 years in state prison on the attempted murder charges to run consecutively. The total 37 years to life in state prison. The sentencing was scheduled for December 18. District Attorney Susan Kakashi made a statement that day. Almost 1 year ago to this day, she said, the Raimondi family suffered an unspeakable tragedy they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. The defendant stole a son, brother, cousin, and friend, leaving them with only the blessing of his memory. She continued, Michael Raimondi was a beautiful soul, and the outpouring of support and love from the community is a testament to his strong character, even at the young age of 15. I hope these guilty pleas and the substantial sentence the defendant is expected to receive provide the Raimondis with a measure of closure, and my office will be here to support them through every phase of this process. Closure. It's a word we use, but what does it really mean for a family like this? Christina will never hold her oldest son again. She'll never see him drive a car, never watch him work on engines at Bios's, never meet his future partner, never hold his children. Matthew will never have his older brother to turn to learn from, to share life's journey with. The grandparents will never watch Michael grow into a man. Every milestone that should have been will be marked by absence instead. 37 years to life in prison. It's a significant sentence. Fernando Jimenez Meza will be at least 78 years old before he's even eligible for parole. But no sentence can bring Michael back. No prison term can undo what was done. Justice in cases like this is a hollow thing. Necessary, yes. Important, certainly, but never enough. So who was Michael Raimondi? Beyond the headlines, beyond the tragedy, who was this boy? He was the kid who loved cars so much he could talk about them for hours. He was the student who made his teachers laugh with his gentle mischief. He was the brother who taught lessons about perseverance. He was the grandson who brought joy, even on dark days. He was the boy who lost himself in origami folds and Lego constructions. He was the teenager excited about joining the police cadet program, about learning to drive, about growing up. He was 15 years old. He had big cheeks and a twinkle in his eye. His smile lit up rooms, and he should still be here. The community of Somers hasn't forgotten him. His teachers remember him in their classrooms, see his empty desk, recall his voice. His coaches remember him at baseball practices. His family visits his grave, talks to him, includes him in their thoughts every single day. The t-shirts bearing his image are worn with pride and sorrow. The vigil candles have long since burned out, but the memory remains. This is the cost of domestic violence. Not just the direct victims, Michael, who lost his life, Christina and Matthew, who were permanently scarred, but the ripples that spread outward, the grandparents traumatized, the cousins grieving, the teachers wounded, the community shaken, the friends who lost someone they cared about, the strangers who heard the story and felt their hearts break for a family they'd never meet. Domestic violence thrives in silence. It grows in the gaps between what we see and what we don't ask about. It festers in the space between suspicion and certainty, between concern and action. Christina Raimondi was in a relationship with a man who had a history, a DWI in 2018, possibly an assault charge, encounters with immigration enforcement. But how much of that was visible? How much could she have known? How much could neighbors have seen? These are the questions that haunt cases like this. Could it have been prevented? Were there warning signs? Should someone have intervened earlier? We ask these questions not to blame victims, but to learn, to improve, to hopefully protect the next family. The town of Somers, in the aftermath of this tragedy, made domestic violence resources more widely available. They partnered with local organizations to provide confidential support, shelters, advocacy, counseling, therapy, and legal services. Town Supervisor Scarano urged anyone affected by domestic violence to seek help, to remember they are not alone. Together, he said, we can create a safer and more supportive community for everyone. It's a small step, but it's something. It's late now. The story is told. Fernando Jimenez Meza awaits his formal sentencing. Christina and Matthew continue their recovery, both physical and emotional. The community of Somers moves forward, forever changed by what happened that October night. And somewhere in the quiet places where memory lives, Michael Raimondi is still 15, still excited about cars, still making people laugh, still folding origami with careful, patient hands, still the boy with the big cheeks and the twinkling eyes, and the smile that lit up rooms. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. All calls are confidential and free. You can also visit thehotline.org for resources and support. You're not alone. There is help available, and you deserve to be safe. Rest now. The story is done, and Michael, wherever he is finally at peace. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.